The Texas population continues to grow, but at the same time here in Central Texas, we know that the water levels continue to fall. Meanwhile, in East Texas, it seems like they're always dealing with floods. But they are not the only ones who are in some high waters. Matt and Abby, TikTok influencers, are being accused of leaving their 2 toddlers behind in a cruise ship room while they went out to dinner. But before we dive into all of these waters, it's time to spill some sweet tea. Today, I'm joined by Aaliyah Formont, who is a water expert here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Sometimes I say enthusiast instead of expert.
Do you actually?
Thank you. Well, today I am. So,
did you always know that you'd grow up one day and become known as a water expert in a public sphere?
Probably not, but my friends coined the term in college. I was the water science girl because my major was super niche. So it's always been a running joke.
And remind me, what school did you go to?
University of Florida.
Did they have a big water department there, or did you just find your calling somewhere in the middle of that?
No, they actually don't, surprisingly. Their ag school is amazing, but our water sciences program maybe had 13 students in the entire college. So it was super niche even there,
So this is your first appearance on a podcast. I mean, especially at least relating to all the policy stuff. And lately, I know that before session, you're still gearing up with some research and stuff like that. So what kind of research have you been working on recently?
Yeah, so in the water policy front, basically water policy at TPPF is a new initiative. So kind of just getting our foot in the door, we wanted to have a foundational research paper. And basically what that all entailed was basically everything that we needed to know before jumping into something specific, backing any sort of specific policy. And we kind of thought our first course of action was acknowledging Proposition 6, which just passed recently in the legislature. It's a billion-dollar fund. I know we're getting into that a little bit later. But acknowledging that, the current state of water, the future of water in Texas.
So this is a research paper that you're working on?
Right.
And this is something that you're currently, are you in the research phase, or is it some writing that you're doing right now?
Yeah, so we're deep into the writing, kind of finishing up our draft of it and then going into review pretty soon. But it's been a lot of fun. It's a huge paper, so.
Yeah. And so on top of that kind of research that you've been doing, I know that you've also been able to take some tours of different locations and the policy areas you're studying, one of those being a desalination plant. Mm-hmm. So later in the episode, we're going to go through some of your trip and talk about that. But first, another reason why I wanted to have you on the show is you are as chronically online as I am.
I am.
And we're going to be talking about Matt and Abby. Mm-hmm. So we're recording this a few days before it goes out. So for us, it was just this morning that they responded to these allegations, I guess. Mm-hmm. So let me go back, give a little bit of a brief around the story, and then we can dive into their response. Okay. So Matt and Abby, they're 25 and 26, and they have 2 kids. They're age 1 and 2, so toddlers. And they're kind of in the family vlog sphere. They also have a podcast and stuff where they just talk about couples and relationships and stuff like that. But a lot of people online are always accusing them of something that's called rage baiting and just trying to get people to be upset at them for whatever reason it is. So they go on a cruise, and it's, I think, a week-long cruise. And for the first 5 days, they're bringing their kids to dinners with them, and they're having trouble with it. One of those nights, they even tried to leave their kids at one of those cruise daycare kind of things, and that didn't work. They had to pick them up. And then day 5 rolls around, day 6 rolls around, and Abby posts this photo that we're seeing right now on her TikTok or on her story. So it says, we ended up taking them for 5 nights, and it became apparent that they weren't enjoying it, and therefore we weren't either. So then we switched our dinner time to after their bedtime and FaceTime the monitors while we ate. And then she explains that baby monitors don't work on board unless you're 10 feet away. And she puts, and then it worked out much better for everyone. Smiley face. And behind all this is pictures of 2 baby monitors. So if you were seeing this for the first time, what would you think was going on?
Yeah, so excuse me. I didn't initially see the picture on Instagram, but when I heard about it on TikTok already, it already was a couple days after she posted it, and it was just people consistently just assuming there was nobody in the room watching her kids. So of course I'm thinking that this is insane. You're on a cruise, and her kids are super young too, and I'm sure they sleep. But there's so many things that can happen, especially with our stories. We've been hearing of, people traveling to other countries and letting their kids stay in their hotel rooms, and things like kidnapping happens. So that was really scary. And now that I'm looking at this.
Oh, yeah. You hadn't seen this before?
No, this is my first time seeing it. I don't know. Like, I'm assuming I probably would have thought the same thing too. What did you think?
So, well, the first thing that I saw today, because this appeared on my feed this morning, was just someone showing this picture along with just different reactions that people are having to the fact that they supposedly left their kids alone so that way they could go have a private dinner. And people are just complaining about family vlogs in general and how self-centered they usually are, and that at the end of the day, it's not about the kids, all that kind of stuff. But then I came to talk to you about it, and you had the other side of the story. So what actually, or at least what is Abby saying happened?
Yeah, so I think it was last night or this morning. I was on TikTok, of course, because I'm either falling asleep or waking up. But I think it was this morning, though, randomly. And I saw her video, and I normally never get them on my feed or anything because it's not something I typically watch. But I watched their video through, and the way they were explaining it, it just would have made perfect sense that they were on an extended family trip. And of course, there was cousins and grandmothers and grandparents there that were helping out with their kids. So it totally made sense to me that, of course, there was someone available just to help watch their kids while they went to dinner. And then she explained the monitor situation. And I babysit all the time. And even when I'm babysitting, there's a monitor. Sometimes I even have the monitor on me when I'm watching kids because it's just nice to know what's going on, even if you're not directly in the room with them. So same thing for them. They basically got this little tent that they slept in, and the monitors inside watching their kids. And even if they're in the same room with them, they'll look at the monitor just to see inside.
Because one of those little sleeping tents and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just to keep out the light and stuff
yeah,
so the kids can
and
sleep.
They said they use it at home and, when they're traveling on vacation too. So I guess she just, they're chronically online too. So they went to post something that maybe they shouldn't have, but it obviously was taken the wrong way and she took it down. So
yeah, this to me still probably does seem like it fits into rage baiting. Unless she was just about to walk to dinner and decided to post that. But I understand at least where people are coming from, assuming that they left their kids in the room and instead of having a real attendant, they had the monitors.
Yeah.
But I'm glad to know, and hopefully she's telling the truth that they were being watched. Yeah.
It was a pleasant view this morning. I was happy to see it.
So let's move on to the other the other water-ish related things for today. Okay, so I was noticing just the past few summers of living here in Central Texas, it seems like every summer everyone's talking about how the water levels are low in the lakes, and that's why it's not the same whenever you go tubing. And that's usually my relationship with some of the water problems. But you were pointing out to me that it's not only in Central Texas that we have that water issue and that drought issue, but it's happening in South Texas as well. And you actually released an op-ed talking about the ramifications of not having enough water resources. So do you want to go into what you wrote about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, we were writing this paper, and one of the parts of our paper are just case studies throughout Texas. And something that just kept coming up in every conversation is this 1944 water treaty that Texas has with Mexico. And now, as I'm doing research, I kind of check the news periodically for certain keywords, droughts, crises in Texas related to water. And every single day I was getting another article about the South Texas water crisis, is what a lot of people call it. And it's basically these, a bunch of farmers are in South Texas. You have citrus, you have sugarcane producers, and that's one of the biggest industries right in South Texas right now. And they were all struggling because they just ultimately have no access to water. And if they do, it's really expensive. And a lot of it had to do with this 1944 water treaty, which basically is an agreement between Texas and Mexico about allocating this much water from the Rio Grande Basin to South Texas. And basically, it's a 5-year plan that they have, and Mexico every year for the past couple 5-year periods has fallen behind on meeting those requirements, while us, the US, we continue to give that water to Mexico when we're not receiving it. So a lot of people are just, getting coalitions together, getting groups together to really try to figure out what we can do on our front and get that water delivered to us. And since we haven't, we've seen one of the biggest sugarcane facilities in the U.S., I believe. It's one of 3 in the U.S. They just recently closed their doors because they don't have water to produce sugarcane anymore, and they can't run their sugar mill. And that was, I think, 500 workers lost their job because of that. And, it's really sad, but that's a huge thing. And 500 people are a lot of employees, but I think we're just going to consistently see more of that in South Texas. And it's not going to just stop at the sugarcane facility. It's going to be, citrus and all the other ag producers down there. So
yeah, so it's called the Lone Star Sugar Mill, and they closed down after 51 years.
Right.
Which is crazy that's something that's been like a long-standing industry there. And like you said, I think it's one of the top 3 in the U.S. in terms of production.
Yeah,
or it was for a while.
It's one of 3.
One of 3 in general in the U.S.?
Yes.
Okay.
And the only one in Texas. So that's a huge economic loss for us.
Yeah. And the citrus part is pretty interesting. So a few years ago, there was like that freeze that we also experienced here in Central Texas, and that went all the way down to the valley, which is where, my family's still there. And a lot of the people who had citrus farms in the area, that was around the time where they actually started closing them down after that. But I'm wondering if there's like that additional component of not having access to, or it's expensive water, right, to be able to have those fields. So it seems like one issue, and then coupled with the fact that it's actually really expensive because of not having like the water resources and stuff, is leading to that decline. Which for me, as someone from the valley, citrus is such a big part of the culture there. Like there's a citrus parade, all that kind of stuff. Like, just going to school was so funny. So even if you're in a city kind of area, you're still then a few minutes after that, you're like in the middle of the country and just going past a ton of different citrus plantations until you get there.
We're losing that. That's like, I'm from Florida, so our orange, we're all known for our oranges and our citrus there too, and that's something they struggle with too in Florida, is just keeping those industries alive. So
yeah, so you mentioned Proposition 6, and so that was signed, or that was legislation from this last legislative session, right?
Yeah, it was a constitutional amendment that we had, yeah.
And the intention of that was to go after water infrastructure. So, or to increase or change how would you phrase it? What did Prop 6 do?
So basically, it was a constitutional amendment that voters could vote on. And I believe it passed with 80% favorability, which was the largest out of any constitutional amendment they offered. And basically, it was allocating $1 billion to already existing financing programs for water-related projects. And then 25% of that was allocated specifically for a new kind of designated area, which is new water. And that was something that is talked about in Senate committee hearings, the Water, Ag, and Rural Affairs Committee. It's kind of a reoccurring topic of just kind of really narrowing in what that means and what even is new water, how are we classifying that, what projects fall underneath that. And that 25% translates to $250 million. So it's a lot of money.
Wait, what is new water?
Yeah.
So I know you're saying you're trying to classify it, but let's give a more broad, less legal definition.
Yeah. So new water is basically, for us and how we understand it and how we're funding it, is essentially anything that's not already existing. So, if you have a water reclamation project where you're basically recycling water, that doesn't count as new water. It has to be a new source. So, desalination, I believe produced water falls underneath that. And then even aquifer storage recovery systems, which I can talk a little bit more about later.
So would those just be ones that we're not already using? So we're tapping into sources that have not been previously used? Sort
of, yeah.
Okay.
There's a couple nuances with that, but for the most part, yes.
So a few days ago, I was talking with a few people about how, as we've had more and more people from California especially move to Texas, And then at the same time, it's just like, what a coincidence. Our water levels are falling at the same time. But it seems like in big cities, it's hard to make sure that we have the right amount of water resources. And then in rural areas, they're probably dealing with it even more since they don't have the same money for infrastructure. What are the infrastructure changes that Prop 6 would allow so that way people can make sure that they have access to water they need?
Yeah. So one of the biggest things and biggest challenges I feel like, we can all agree on in policy and water related challenges is just like deferred maintenance, just the basic infrastructure, how water moves from point A to point B. And the challenge with that is a lot of that requires a lot of funding. Basically, in energy, water, any sort of transmission is probably going to be your largest expense because it just costs so much money to build those piping systems. You have your civil engineers, your electrical engineers, all of that has to just work really well. And there's a lot of permit requirements. So it takes a lot of money, a lot of time.
So how does piping, how does that influence the water that we're able to access?
Yeah, so for us, Texas is like number 5 in lead pipes, which is, that's a really outdated system. That means a lot of our pipes were built, 50 plus years ago and should have probably already been replaced. And in those cases, and that's even in our big cities, that's our rural areas. So all of those outdated water transmission lines, they are, they're breaking, they're leaking, and if they break, you have your boiled water notices. If they're about to break, you have to turn off access to water to certain areas, which kind of can hurt other parts of the system. So there's a lot of problems. They're all connected, and they require a lot of money. So that's kind of where Prop 6 is, working to address too.
Mm-hmm. And I've seen, just living in Austin, different initiatives on the ballot for city-wide funding and stuff for water and increased stuff to change our infrastructure. Mm-hmm. But Prop 6 targets more of the rural communities. Why is that?
They do target rural communities because there's just this, in our cities, for example, in Austin, you have a lot of people here. You have a lot of people with a lot of expensive properties. Those taxes, you have a lot of tax funding here and a lot of ways to get money from people living in Austin to fund projects like this. So the city of Austin has, a bigger opportunity to use that money provided to address the city's water needs, right? And then you have cities that are out in West Texas or the Panhandle that, they have the same problems as us with outdated infrastructure, but you have less people living there. Maybe it's more like industry focused. So there's kind of been this lack of concern for those areas because more often than not, they're great at handling themselves. They love the rural component to where they live. But with those infrastructure related projects and just how, the climate of Texas has changed with policies, they just need help addressing that, and that comes in funding, and that's something they can't get from their constituents in the city with their tax money. So,
whenever I was a kid, I always used to think, well, if all these people are struggling to get water, we have an ocean. Why don't we just use ocean water and that would fix it? And of course, then I was like, no, we need fresh water. When we're talking about needing water, that's what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. And especially at the time, because I was like, well, isn't there a way to take the salt out of it? Way back then, obviously, it was being worked on, but it wasn't ready yet. But in Texas, we are having some advancements with desalination, and you recently got to tour a desalination plant. So Aaliyah actually sent me a few photos from that, and let's walk through what's happening there at the desalination plant. Yeah. So what am I seeing here in this picture?
So this is us actually inside the facility, and just for background, it's located in San Antonio. It's a couple miles south of San Antonio, actually. It's San Antonio water system, and this one's called the H2 Oaks facility.
Did you say H2 Oaks?
H2 Oaks.
That's funny.
Sounds like a winery, right?
Actually, a little bit.
Yeah. Beautiful facility also. I don't have pictures of us walking in, but essentially they kind of built up the facility as an educational experience too, because they want people to come and see this technology. And so much of the architecture and just how they laid out the design, and also like even the colors and stones they use reflect the aquifer that they're using. It's honestly really impressive.
It's really funny. I understand why people call you the water girl now.
Yeah.
When hearing how you geek out about
I know. I was running around like a little kid when I got invited to go on this tour.
Is this a private thing, or is it something that's like connected to the city or the state in any way?
The facility or the tour?
The facility.
So the facility is a part of their water system there. Yeah. So it's
Okay.
part of the city. And it's funded by the city.
How many other ones are there like this in Texas?
There's 53 municipal desalination facilities. So, and none of those are actually salt water. They're all brackish water, surface water. And I think there's one recycled water desalination facility.
Sorry, so you're saying that these are using brackish and what other kind of water?
Oh, or surface water. This one specifically is brackish water from the aquifer below. Basically, they're pumping water from the aquifer, and it's being, it goes through a couple of filtration processes before it hits these membranes. But basically, as all the, large solids are removed from the water, it'll go through these piping systems, and reverse osmosis happens. And essentially, they use so much pressure that naturally the fresh water kind of flows through the membrane, and then everything else is rejected, and then they circulate it again and again just to make sure they get as much water as they possibly can, and you get a greater recovery ratio. So is it like if my
Brita filter was multiplied by like a couple million degrees, and then that's the purity that you get here?
No, this is way more advanced than your Brita, but yeah, essentially the same. It was just a great experience because they have a great desalination facility, but they're also known for their aquifer storage recovery facility. And they just did a really great job at kind of showing the feasibility for this for us, for, Texans and for the future. Basically, their aquifer storage recovery, I've said that a couple times already, but essentially it's taking from an aquifer below it's probably during a rainy, wet season, you have extra water, and then you're able to kind of collect that excess water and then pump it into either a man-made aquifer or another pre-existing aquifer, and kind of use that as like your water storage tank. So whenever you're in a drought, they can just pump the water from the aquifer and then, send it out to residents in the community.
Is there any initiative, because I mentioned East Texas as well, is there any thought with like moving the water and the excess that they have over there with their flooding and everything to making it usable water, whether it be on farms or like something actually available for drinking?
Yeah, that's a huge debate at the legislature.
Okay, well then give me what are pros and cons? Who are the two sides here?
Yeah, so and I talk about water a lot in the sense that, we look at water and it's either you have a bunch of it or you don't, and you're either in a drought or you're not. But a lot of it has more to do with, policy and management and infrastructure than like how much water resource we actually have available. And we're so advanced that we should be able to manage it well, and we can. But with policy and the way the regulatory environment's set up for water, it's kind of old school in Texas, but it's kind of complicated too. It's basically we have a certain regulatory framework for groundwater and then surface water, and they're very different. So groundwater, if you buy a property, you own the rights to that water below it, and then your surface water is owned by the land or the state of Texas, and they're allowed to they kind of hold it in their regulatory environment, so then they can use it for whatever they see fit for. But it kind of like negates the whole hydrologic cycle, because if you're pulling from groundwater, the surface water is impacted. So we're seeing now more than ever that happening and those issues arising. And then with groundwater, you have these things called these things called senior water rights. So basically, people in East Texas, the moment they give up some of their groundwater for other uses, and let's say another part of Texas, they give up those senior water rights and they get junior water rights. So now
So it does get complicated.
it gets really complicated. So now essentially nobody wants to give up their water, and it could be the economic.
So what you're saying
thing to
is that global warming isn't at fault, but but bad infrastructure might be.
Or bad policy. No, but I think at the time it made a lot of sense for that to happen. And, you know, if you buy a property, you want those rights to the water, so it makes sense. I just think there's going to, at some point, that's going to be a bigger conversation of how do we move forward from that and protect people's rights to their water. So.
Mm-hmm. So something that I find really impressive is it was you here at the foundation pushing to start going into water research and actually diving into the policy aspects behind this. And I mean, you've only been here for, what was it, 1 year by the time you started trying to move that initiative?
Oh gosh, I think a little less, but
okay. All I was going to say is it's just really impressive that you obviously, you know, you went through college and kind of carved out this little niche for yourself and then continued to push that in a foundation like this. Why was it an issue that matters so much to you?
Yeah, so I think like going into college, you kind of want to do something you're passionate about, right? And I knew that I loved writing at the time. I knew that I loved working with people and nonprofit work. So I kind of went in with this mentality, and this is from back in middle school. I had somebody come speak at my local church at the time, and she was doing a nonprofit that helped build wells in other countries so they could have access to water. And it was in that moment, sitting like in a church service in middle school, I was like, wow, like it was just kind of shocking to me that something so basic wasn't available to people. And it sounds really cliche, but you would see kind of a year, and it would only be a year, of her going in, putting this well in. It was super cheap, super basic technology at the time too. And then coming back a year later, and now there's a school and there's communities and just like true like flourishing in that area. So, and even as a middle schooler, I was just like, wow, like I would love to just have some role in that. And then kind of, you know, went through high school, got to college, and I knew like still that I wanted to be in nonprofit work somehow. And I was sitting with my advisor, and he was just looking at me. He was like, I really like that you want to do nonprofit work, and I really like you want to major in nonprofit work. But what if we do something that has like a skill set behind it? So, like a hard technical skill, so maybe you can apply that to a nonprofit. And I was like, wow, I never thought about that. Great advice. And, you know, shout out Dr. Sisk. He was awesome. But he did get me into one of the niche's majors, which was water sciences. So, and then in that, didn't think I wanted to do policy at all either. I just knew I wanted to help people and maybe help them get access to water somehow. And then I started working it was an internship during the summer in college at the Department of Environmental Protection for Florida. And it was field work. We were on the boat every day collecting like water quality data, very nerdy, very chem focused. And I loved it, but was like, okay, like we're jumping through so many hoops because of policies that are enacted right now. And I was like, okay, now I want to do public policy somehow. So this was a wonderful chance to get involved. And I joined Life Powered, which was the energy campaign, but they also focused on how energy scarcity hurts the poor and just, you know, the implications for other countries too, and that, and just our role here in Texas. And energy and the water nexus is really real. And I knew eventually somehow we would get involved in water too. So it was just the perfect segue of everything, and it worked out beautifully. So I'm really happy about it.
So it's interesting that I'm so glad that you had someone who's able to say, hey, it's great that you're passionate about this.
I know.
But you might need an actual skill to make it happen. So let's say that there's someone, well, I mean, it's true. There's so many people who go to school, get these majors and masters even, and then they have no real way to apply it, even though they're passionate about something. So if there is an issue and like there's a college age girl who's like, I really like, I don't know, maybe it's like housing affordability, whatever it is, like
Yeah.
something that they're really passionate about. What is the best way that you think that you can start making a difference in that?
Yeah, I just think you kind of, and I've given my friends the same advice too, especially my younger cousins, anybody that I went to high school with and they're starting college and I have a moment to offer them advice. I just kind of sit down with them and I'm like, what is, because you can always do like a double major too, and you have that business background, you could have that, even if it was communications or water sciences too, like you could technically do another major and then double major too if you wanted or minored, and kind of just figuring out where you think you're most passionate in and how can you get any sort of technical skill that just makes you a value add for whatever it is you may do in the future. And you don't even have to think about the company or what that kind of looks like, just kind of setting yourself up to get where you want mentally, but just any sort of hard skill you can offer somebody is just so important. And then you can kind of learn the nuances of nonprofit operations, which is super hard, but you could also minor in that and you learn as you go too. So kind of thinking about what is harder to learn as you go versus what could you get the most from in your 4 years in college.
So make the most of your 4 years with a good skill that's applicable.
Yeah.
And I'll say it kind of worked for me too, where I did something that's like, again, a practical, which is funny to say doing film was a practical skill.
It is.
But
it
the
is.
editing component actually has been very helpful for me to have. And having a hard skill, not just what makes a good story, but then how do you do something with it? So yeah, I think that's great advice. And I hope that especially as people now in the conservative movement are almost writing off college degrees to a certain extent.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that there's going to be more colleges that are just offering, or at least encouraging people to take on stuff that's has a practical and technical component that they can really use, and then hopefully make a change in the SAVA that you have.
It's really sweet.
So yeah, thank you so much for coming on to the show to talk about water policy, drama all the way out to the sea, and everything in between. And this was actually, I'm not sure if I mentioned at the beginning, this is your first podcast appearance.
It is.
And you did a great
I was so
job.
nervous.
Yeah. Well, hopefully whatever your next one is, you're not going to be as nervous anymore.
Yeah.
And I just really appreciate you taking the time to come talk to me.
Thanks for having me. You're the best.
Yep. And everyone else, we will see you in 2 weeks.